The Red Room, a place whispered about in hushed voices, a forbidden chamber locked away deep within the Blackwood Manor. The house had stood for over 2 centuries, a grotesque monument to the sins of the past, its rotting wood and sagging foundation seething with a presence that refused to be forgotten. No one entered the Red Room. Not anymore. The last known person to step inside was a young maid named Eleanor Whitmore. That was in 1896. She was found the next morning, curled into a fetal position, her body so pale it seemed drained of all its blood. Her face, frozen in a soundless, endless scream. The coroner swore her eyes had been gouged from her skull, but when the body was examined again, her sockets were empty, no signs of force, no trace of blood. Just hollow, black pits. Her fingernails were shredded, torn from their beds, as if she had clawed at something in the dark. Her tongue was missing, the edges of the wound blackened, as if burned. And yet, there was no fire. The Red Room was sealed that day. But legends say the house is still waiting for someone foolish enough to enter, to wake whatever lingers behind that door. Fast forward to present day. The Blackwood Manor, abandoned and forgotten, had become the subject of local dares. No one stayed long. Some swore they heard scratching behind the walls. Others claimed to see pale hands reaching from the shadows, fingers too long, nails cracked and curling like claws. But then came Daniel Grayson, a skeptic, a YouTuber. He wanted proof, solid, recorded evidence that the Red Room was nothing more than a myth. And so, on the night of October 13th, armed with cameras, a flashlight and a cocky grin, Daniel stepped into the house. The air was thick with the stench of decay. The floor groaned beneath his feet, like something stirring from a long slumber. But he wasn't afraid. Not yet. The door to the Red Room stood at the end of the hall, its wood blackened as if it had been burned. Strange symbols carved deep into the surface seemed to pulse in the dim light. Symbols that looked like open mouths, screaming. He turned the knob. It was unlocked. The room was suffocatingly dark. His flashlight flickered violently before dying altogether. Panic swelled in his throat as the walls seemed to shift, closing in around him. The air reeked of iron, of blood, and something sickly sweet, like rotting fruit. Then a wet sound. A slow, sickening drip. Daniel lifted his camera's night vision, and his stomach lurched. The walls, they were covered in flesh, pulsing, veined. The drip came from the ceiling where something alive was hanging. A figure, not quite human. Its face was a grotesque, agonized mask, stretched too far over its skull, mouth yawning in an eternal scream. Its limbs were wrong, elongated, bony, with fingers that ended in glistening black claws. Its torso was split open, ribs peeled back like the petals of some horrific flower, its insides writhing with something, moving. It had no eyes, but it saw him. It twitched, a jerking, unnatural movement, as if something inside it was pulling its strings. Daniel stumbled back, but the door was gone. The walls groaned, convulsing like a giant living stomach. The figure cocked its head, then lunged. His screams were muffled by the wet squelch of tearing flesh. The last footage from Daniel's camera was a blur of thrashing limbs, an inhuman shriek, and the gurgling, choking sounds of something feasting. They found his camera outside the house the next morning, its lens cracked, smeared with something thick and red. The footage? Corrupted. The casing was dented, covered in deep, jagged scratches, like something had tried to crush it. Daniel Grayson was never seen again, and the Red Room remains waiting. What do you think happened to Daniel? Do you think he was taken or transformed? Would you ever dare step inside the Red Room? Let me know in the comments, if you dare. And don't forget to subscribe for more scary, mysterious, and haunting stories. You never know what might be lurking just out of sight.